Welcome, everyone. This is our last conversation about Dietrich Bonhoeffer's lectures on Christology. I'm here in Des Moines for the kickoff of the second cohort of the Iowa Preachers Project, and it starts tonight. So Todd and I are going to finish these conversations out a little early today. Todd, how are you?
I'm good. I'm here. You're in Iowa. I'm in Oklahoma. I have not moved from most of the time that I've been on these calls. So you're the traveler.
So Todd, the Bonhoeffer's lectures end with a section called "Positive Christology," and in particular, these last pages talk about the humiliated Christ as the divine Christ and the implications that has for how we think about the church as Christ's body and ourselves as disciples of this particular Christ. You want to summarize a little bit like what Bonhoeffer's doing here, talking about humiliation, because it's a word that I think people can hear in ways that Bonhoeffer doesn't mean.
I think that's actually an important statement. So that if we get off, we finish or we get off track, I think that's probably the most important distinction, because I know that in my initial read of this particular passage, I looked askance at this particular point, because usually when we hear someone talk about humiliation, we think that passively. I humiliated you, and I don't think. In fact, that's what I've written in the margin here. I don't think, for instance, on page 356, I don't think in the middle of that page, I don't think that's what his intent is. I think this is God's intention, and the idea of the humiliated one is that in our perception of who God is, it's like the kenotic piece in Philippians. This is God's own determination to become human.
Mm-hmm.
And so in becoming human, we would draw the comparison and say, that's pretty humiliating for God, and to do that to himself, and become the humiliated one. He's got a line here. I'll go ahead and read this section. How was Jesus' particular way of existing as the humiliated one expressed? And that he has taken on sinful flesh. The conditions for his humiliation are set by the curse, the fall of Adam. In being humiliated, Christ, the God-human, enters of his own free will into the world of sin and death. He enters there in such a way as to conceal himself there, so that he is no longer recognizable visibly as the God-human. He comes among us humans, not in morphe theo, but rather incognito, as a beggar among beggars, an outcast among outcasts. He comes among sinners as the one without sin, but also as a sinner among sinners. This is the central problem for all Christology.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think if we're going to move, into kind of how this ends up, he's trying to help us think through what this means for the church's own self-understanding. Because to jump ahead, the interesting last sentence of the next last paragraph includes, "It is only good for the church to seek forgiveness for its sins."
Yeah.
So he seems to be really.
You meant it's only good for the church to seek the forgiveness of other people's sins, right?
Well, I guess we could twist Bonhoeffer into saying what we normally practice today, but we would probably be mystifying his students were they to listen into us. But so that's kind of I think sort of at least if we can emphasize a line that you often use in referencing Barth, that I've come to really like, that God determined to not be God without us. And one of the ways in which this particular reality shows up for us is as we understand the humiliated one, not as in we humiliated God, we brought God low, but God came to us. If we could use that sort of language.
Yeah.
Do you think?
Yeah, I see Joanna's name there. Speaking of forgiveness.
Ah,
Um,
we should have had Johanna on.
um, yeah, I think this last few pages here is really important. Because we're used to, I think, for Christians at least, we're used to thinking of Paul's line that the cross is a stumbling block.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
and is foolishness and a stumbling block. What Bonhoeffer wants to say here, though, is that no, um, it is God's intent that Easter is a stumbling block too. Um,
mm,
that the tomb is empty, um, and it's empty in a way that leaves the church bereft of any obvious sign or evidence um, that it can live in a glorious manner, right? That the tomb is empty and that Jesus remains incognito um, post Easter in a way that the church has no choice but to try to emulate the humiliated Jesus.
mm,
Um, and I think that's, I was I was talking with a pastor, a part of the project last night about um, the devil and Robert Jensen's essay on the devil. And one of the points Jensen makes is that um, part of the devil's problem is that he has no sense of humor, that he's all wit and no humor, Jensen says. And what he means is the devil, unlike God, unlike Jesus, the devil refuses to make himself an object in our hands.
mm, mm,
And I was thinking about that again in light of a lot of the social media chatter this past week. That we have been trained in a very short time that smart tones have been available to us. That we should comment on everything.
mm,
um,
mm,
and that we're and so everything, every event, every person in the news is an object at our disposal. And to the extent that we are on screens, um, most of the time, um, it's not our true selves that we are letting be an object for someone
mm. Oh,
else's,
yeah.
right?
Right. Right.
And what Bonhoeffer's saying here is that um, rather than be a people who take to our devices to point out the sins of others, um, that we need to try to emulate the incognito. We need to be the incognito Jesus, seeking out our own sins, making
Mm,
ourselves an object before
mm,
others, for an honest and vulnerable assessment of who we are. Does that make
mm.
sense?
Yeah. Um, yeah. I mean, I think so. I haven't thought about that in the way Jensen, or as you described Jensen, but I do think that um, I do think there is a way that what you've described helps us to assess that one thing that we've been trying to do in these series of lectures is to um, expose all of us to the reality that God is subject as well as object, and that God is not the object that we get to decide and mold and shape, but there's an exhaustive subject that um, exposes our own limitations and our
Mm-hmm.
own lack of understanding. And so, um, when we unwittingly present to the world ourselves in the way you describe in social media, where I can try to make sure that my camera exposes that I like Van Gogh in the background, and that I might have a little bit of artsy lamp sitting on my desk. Um, that betrays the fact that I don't have a Van Gogh sitting anywhere else. And I, and I'm really not terribly artsy. You've seen my office, so anything that's in here, my wife did. I didn't do. So all that to say that we actually present ourselves as objects to be scrutinized and ridiculed because we're pretending, at least in some part, to be something maybe that we're not. So getting to the point of a willingness to reveal my own sins and weaknesses and foibles and fallibilities, then opens me up to being a subject, I think, is what you're saying. At least in part, if that
Yeah, I
makes
think
any sense.
yeah, you were talking subject object. I think we mentioned this at the beginning of this series of conversations, that I think one of the things that Bonhoeffer is mindful to try to correct as a German Lutheran is the rupture of the person and work of Christ. That's a kind of Christianity that wants Jesus as your savior, without the content by which he lived his life, impinging on your own.
Right.
So it's
Yeah.
Jesus the Savior without Jesus the Rabbi, or Jesus the Rabbi without Jesus the Savior. And so Bonhoeffer wants to hold the person and work of Jesus together, but Bonhoeffer also wants to hold those together in the life of the church too. That discipleship means trying to be obedient. Again and again, Bonhoeffer says, the most important thing is to do the will of Christ, and that's new every morning. That's literally how he ends these lectures. That Jesus, because Jesus is alive, his will for you is new and unique, is new every day and unique to you. And I think that's I think that's what is missing from so much Christianity, that people see. And I think that's exactly why people either walk away from the faith or don't even consider it, because they don't see a church, despite its weakness and imperfections, seeking to do the will of God, and doing everything for Him. So I rather than talk around this, I'm just going to read these last two paragraphs here. So Bonhoeffer says, with the humiliated Christ, his church must also be humiliated. And again, that's where, humble. With the humble Christ, his church must also be humble. It cannot seek any visible authentication of its nature as long as Christ has renounced doing so for himself. Nor may it, as a humiliated church, look upon itself with vain self-satisfaction as though being humiliated were the visible proof that Christ is with it. There is no law here, and the humiliation of Christ is not a principle for the church to follow, but rather a fact. Even the church can be high, and it can be lonely, if only both conditions occur for the sake of Christ. It is not good for the church to hasten to proclaim its lowliness, but it is not good either for the church to hasten to proclaim its greatness and power. It is only good for the church to seek forgiveness for its sins. Even the church, as the presence of Christ, God who became human, even the church was humiliated, resurrected, and exalted. Even the church must receive the will of God every day anew from Christ. For the church, too, Christ becomes every day anew an offense to its own desires and hopes. The church must stumble every day anew over the sentence, "You will all become deserters because of me." And it must hold on to the promise, "Blessed is anyone who takes no offense at me." That's quite a way to end.
That's quite it is. It is. And I don't know. I'm certain that given that this is just approaching 100 years ago, give or take, half a decade. It still seems to me, in one sense, prescient for our own time,
Hmm.
and at the same time, likely an ongoing, always description of the church.
Hmm.
So I'm certain that those listening now and those who will listen later, when they hear you read that again, they will envision certain churches they're aware of that fit categories that are so described. I mean, it'll be hard not to, right? And the problem with doing that is that if we're participating in any church, then we are actually a part of a church that probably at some point needs to recognize that Jesus will always be its own stumbling block.
Hmm.
And I think that's a I don't know if everyone's really signed up for that.
Yeah, there aren't a lot of churches that say come and follow me and get crucified.
Right.
Um, you know, you're special. You look like just the kind of person who will betray me. Um,
Right. I mean,
but
if take that, take the line, you will all become deserters because of me. I mean, that if we're paying careful attention to our own lives, that happens at least once a day.
and I think in the same way that Bonhoeffer is not allowing for a distinction between the person and work of Christ, he's not allowing he's resisting a distinction between law and gospel, right?
Yes. Yes.
Because what he's not doing here is saying, well, Todd, we're all going to become deserters in Christ. So why don't we just not bother with attempting obedience and just be
Right.
thankful that we have the forgiveness of sins in the
Right.
cross? Bonhoeffer saying, yes, it's true. You can't do this. And not only can you not do this, the thing that you can do really well is nail him to a cross.
Right.
You're good with a hammer in your hands, Todd.
Right.
Nonetheless, you have to move in the direction of blessed is anyone who takes no offense at me. So it's not like obedience, as the opposite of disobedience. It's obedience in the face of it. And that's possible because Christ is risen and he comes to us every day with a new command. And that's not here, but it is in I think it's in his ethics. I know it's in discipleship. Where Bonhoeffer wants to insist that the commandments are not universal principles. That the idea of universal principles kind of presumes that God is either dead or distant, rather than Jesus comes to us the same way he comes to the disciples. And he comes to us with concrete invitations and challenges, and that the commands help us discern the way forward. But we have to discern, because every day there's an invitation and a challenge opened up in front of us.
Always. Mm-hmm.
So what else is on your mind here?
Well, one of the other things I thought, since we're both kind of working through the miracle stories on page 359 there at the top, I thought I would pull one on you. Usually you're pulling one on me. But here he says, the ancient religious world was full of miracles. That is to say, the realm of miracles is not identical with God's realm. The realm of miracles is only superior to that of humankind. The category to which miracles belongs is not that of God, but rather that of magic. When Jesus performed miracles, he was preserving his incognito in a world of magic. The doing miracles did not serve to authenticate him either. To the contrary, people thought his power was demonic. So, I how have you been working that out in your preaching on the miracle?
I haven't yet, but it's funny. I have. Um, I took notes not related to any specific scripture passage earlier at the beginning of this series. So I read Sergei Bulgakov's little book on miracles, on relics and miracles, I think is the name of it. And it's good. And yeah, he's probably the most significant Russian Orthodox theologian of the 20th century. I mean, not that I'm in a position to evaluate that. That's just what David Bellion article says. But I have read a couple of his books, and they're helpful in a way that, they're almost pre-modern in a very helpful way.
Right.
So one of the things that Bulgakov wants to make a point of saying is that, in the West we think there's a problem with miracles,
Right.
because we have assumptions about how the quote unquote natural world works. And Bulgakov's like, well, no. If you just take scripture seriously, like miracles happen in a world of magic. And so, for the world of the Bible, the problem isn't like how do you explain miracles? It's how you distinguish them from like how do you distinguish that a miracle is a work of God versus the work of God's enemy? That's the distinction, which explains why the Pharisees and the scribes are consternated in some of those exchanges, because that he might be doing them in the power of the devil is a possibility.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't know that I have an answer for you other than just to say that was something that Bulgakov brought onto my radar. And I think Bonhoeffer's drawing attention to it as well.
Yeah. I might not have otherwise picked up that had we not been, doing what we're doing and week in and week out working through, not just the reality of the miracle, but its revelation. And in its revelation, it distinguishes um, the source, if you will, or who's doing the miracle, is distinguished in the context of each miracle. So that when they come and accuse Jesus of, casting out demons by the prince of demons, you're left like, well, but like that doesn't even make sense. The logic doesn't work because that you wouldn't be, if you're intending harm for somebody, you wouldn't be doing something good for them. So your logic, because you're blaming, you're using the accuser to accuse, and so I like I said, I might have glossed that a little bit more had we not been, working week in and week out for now quite a while.
But the to what Bonhoeffer refers to Jesus as incognito, the miracles are a good illustration of that, right? Because
Right.
there are episodes in the Gospels where the miracle is a revelation of his divine identity. And so when Jesus walks on water in the storm to the disciples, he says, "I am," making a connection to the revelation at the burning bush. But then there are other episodes where Jesus is just walking along, runs into a grieving mom who's taking her boy to the funeral, and he has compassion on her, and it's not necessarily intended as a revelation of anything other than he's just the incognito God who has taken compassion on this person. And so and that's another way, right, that the incognito functions, in that there is no reliable process or principle by which he operates. and it's almost like he willfully refuses to do so. Like I'm thinking of all the different episodes where like he's like, like Jesus, just touch him, and like actually I'm going to take him outside of town, and then I'm going to spit in his
Right.
eyes,
Right.
and then I'm going to make it so that like, well, I've got to do it a second time over, or
Right.
no, I'm not going to do that. Like you just go to the pool and wash, and
Yeah.
I'll just assume you're okay. um,
Yeah.
that he won't. Yeah, I think what I said in a sermon a few weeks ago is just like he refuses to be made useful to
Right.
us.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. That your reference to the incognito. I should have, and Jackie's, I think, listening, but she goes, "Yeah, Todd, you probably should have included that yesterday." But in the miracle of where it sounds pretty gross that Jesus spits on his fingers and touches a man's tongue. Um, if you do a little reading, that wouldn't have startled anybody that Jesus was, if he was a miracle worker, if he's using his own saliva to bring some sort of medical improvement to someone's life, that startles us. But in his day, that would have been like, oh yeah, okay. So incognito would be that, okay, he's just a miracle worker like we've seen other people kind of perform. It's our expectation that if you spit 3 times and then take what the doctor told you, it's going to be better. That's Pliny the Elder. So, I mean, that's a fascinating way to look back on that. That we are startled by some of these things, but in their context, that was the
Well,
world.
or just um, gosh, I was just talking to somebody about this recently that just we live in a world, a country, a culture where it is increasingly commonplace for people to say things to another person in email or verbal form, uh, sending positive energy to you, or
Right,
sending good
right,
vibes,
right,
or
right,
I'm thinking of you, as a way of
right,
saying, or as a way of avoiding saying I'm praying for you.
right.
Um, um,
Not realizing that sounds very magical.
like what the language of prayer strikes us as supernatural,
Right.
not the language of good vibes. Which
Right.
which I don't even know. Like I can identify an act that is prayer. I don't know what good vibes means. Um, you know,
That is
like
funny. That is
I know
funny.
what prayers are. Like I can tell you some of them, and I can like,
Right.
but like I don't know what good vibes are.
Right. Right.
Even though the Beach Boys song is really old. And so it's just like we're always in a context where um the distinction between miracle and magic has to happen. I
Right.
guess is what I'm
Right.
saying.
Right.
And
Totally. Yeah.
so like towards the end of his life, Bonhoeffer writes religion was Christianity.
Hmm.
And what he, what he has in mind is like, um, okay, we live in a modern world. Um, don't feel the need to like drape all this religious language on it, Christians. Just own up to your responsibility in the world.
Right.
And yeah, and so I think it's they're I'm getting too far afield now, but
No, I mean, I think that's a way I think expose the fact that there is a disdain for magic at the same time while employing ideas that are magical, and that must persist. It shows up seemingly all the time,
and I think
just in different
yeah,
ways.
that's what I was thinking too. Is and Bonhoeffer would probably disagree. That I think if to the extent the church, the Protestant church, runs away from the mystical elements of its tradition, people are going to seek him out in other ways.
Sure, absolutely,
So if you
absolutely.
overly rationalize the faith and take out all the mysticism, all the charismatic parts of it, get rid of the sacraments, turn them into memorials. Like people are gonna look. Um,
I'm gonna go get me some crystals.
I mean, yeah. So there's a part of it that I understand. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
There's something else you said that I was
Hmm.
gonna
You mean
respond
you're
to.
gonna allege that I said something that provoked you?
Oh no, it's something Maley said. Sorry.
Yeah. So Maley does ask, what does Jesus mean in the Beatitude? Blessed are those who suffer because of me. Is this an eschatological blessing or a present? I assume present reality or present blessing. Or so.
Yeah,
What do you think?
I would say Maley actually to everyone. I assume it's probably still available. Um, Years ago, Stanley Hauerwas did a lecture at Wheaton College on um, Dietrich Bonhoeffer and John Howard Yoder on the Sermon on the Mount.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it ended up in his book, Performing the Faith.
Yeah.
Um, I listened to that so many times, I could probably give it to you word for word right now. Um, and a lot of my reading of Bonhoeffer has been shaped by listening to that so many times. Um, and it also shows up in Stanley's Matthew commentary too.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
in the Sermon on the Mount. And so, yeah, I think the best way of hearing that, because what you don't want, because the Beatitudes are different from the Sermon on the Mount,
Yeah.
right? The they're the way to interpret the Sermon on the Mount. And so you don't want to turn, okay, Maley now has to go suffer in order to like, earn a place in the kingdom of heaven.
Right.
That's both law and dangerous.
Right.
And contrary to the character of Christ. And Stanley says, and I think he's right, that the best way to hear the Beatitudes is um, there are those among you who suffer. Good
Hmm.
for you.
Hmm.
The kingdom of God is yours.
Hmm.
And so and that connects to what Bonhoeffer is doing at the end of these lectures, right?
Right.
That
Right.
if the church is intentional about emulating and being obedient to the humble God, Jesus Christ, it should have in its midst those who suffer, those who are grieving, those who are
Right.
hungering and thirsting for righteousness, those who have been
Yeah.
persecuted because of Jesus, the poor. Um, and so so it's less, this is going to happen to you or
Right.
this should happen to you. And it's more an indication that if none of these categories constitute your community called church, you're probably not following the Lord.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think Dallas Willard did the same thing in the Divine Conspiracy and setting up who's described there. He just, I mean, sounds just like what you're referencing in terms of Hauerwas and
Yeah, so it's I
his
think Bonhoeffer would say like the Beatitudes give you like all right, here's the list, look around, who's missing,
right, right.
and and
I oh yeah,
and not even like go find them. It's like why are they not here? Like what is it about our
yeah.
message and our ministry, such that those people are not among us.
Yeah, I'll press it one more. Willard has this vision he conveys where the disciples are, say, in the inner circle, and the people that he's describing in the Beatitudes are sitting outside the circle. So he's actually looking over the disciples' heads and he's calling attention to those who are present and telling them it isn't just for them, it's for you,
Mhm.
and the kingdom is yours. And so I kind of like that picture too.
Well, I was thinking too, the lectionary passage for the gospel this past Sunday, right? That there's almost a way to like read the Beatitudes as like a foreshadowing of the people Jesus is going to like dredge up
Right.
in his wake, And
Absolutely.
guess what?
Absolutely.
Like, there's tax
Right.
collectors and sinners now,
Right.
and now it produces conflict. you know?
Right. Right.
um,
Imagine.
and so and so you like, it isn't just that like if you follow Jesus, you will find those who suffer among you. It's that you're going to suffer the fact that the suffering are with you.
Right.
As
Right. No,
speaking
absolutely.
of someone like, it's a good thing that we have like, people experiencing homeless in the congregation. It's also
Mm.
it's also not fun.
Right.
It
Right.
comes with
Right.
headaches that
Right.
you wouldn't
Right. Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
choose unless you chose or were chosen by Jesus.
Yeah. Which I would plug and say that that sermon from Sunday was very good too, by the way. So, if someone wants to go check out the
I don't.
sermon on Luke 15, it was really good.
I didn't like. I had a joke in there about Pelagius, and I just got like a really limp chuckle from some people. Um,
What I thought was a funny thing, at least one liner. I got absolutely nothing Sunday, so I probably should. I probably should do what Patty says. Just
I'm
quit.
like,
Leave those out.
it's like you Lutherans need to be better catechized. You should be laughing at the Pelagius jokes.
Right. Right. Absolutely. They should.
um, so for folks to know, we are closing the books on Bonhoeffer's lectures on Christology. And I have over these last few weeks met complete strangers who have been following along with us. So that's been fun
Yeah, that's good.
uh, to see and to know. And for what's coming next, so next Monday, the next 2 Mondays, we will be with Chris Green talking about some sermons from his new book, A Life. All life comes from tenderness. So I would encourage people to look up the conversation I had with Chris a couple weeks ago about the book
Hmm.
itself.
Right.
And then next Monday, Todd, I, and Chris will talk about some sermons from the first part of the book. And then the following Monday, Chris, Josh, and I will talk with Chris. We'll talk about some sermons from the second half of his book. And I'll make those pages available to people too.
Yeah, because the introduction is worth the price, and the last sermon is worth the book. So all of them are good, but those two bookends are really worth checking out.
Yeah. So, Chris, Chris is looking forward to it. So,
Yeah, good,
well,
great.
it's good being in the Central
Well,
Time Zone with you, Todd. So if you shout, will I be able to hear you?
well, I mean, I'd have to really give it a good bit to reach all the way up there to Iowa, but I'm assuming it's a little bit cooler there than it is here. So,
I don't know.
you know,
Everyone keeps talking about how hot it is. I'm like, it's like not as bad as Virginia.
no, no, it wouldn't be.
But all right.
All right. Well, hope the cohort thing goes well.
Yeah, we start tonight. I'll let you know.
Good.
Well, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, so just a little like sneak preview for the three people who will read what I write. So I'm supposed to like preach the opening service tonight, right? And Ken gave me Romans 10. How can they hear without and I think you and I have talked about how like one of my pet peeves of late is that I think we're reading passages of scripture such that we're not actually reading the Bible.
Right.
And so like we're reading little pieces and we ignore the context.
Hmm.
And so, I was like, so I read all of Romans 9 through 11 again. And I'm like,
Mm.
if you just zero in on Romans 10, it sounds like Paul is saying like, well, faith comes from hearing, hearing comes from a preacher. That's how the salvation thing works. And actually
Right.
like Paul sets that up to make the point that isn't how it works. Because like, that's what Israel had.
Right. A bunch of
Right?
them.
Like God sent them preachers, they heard them, they didn't confess and believe.
No.
And so instead, Paul's like,
That-
no, God's working through all of this mysteriously to like have mercy on all. And so actually, like, it isn't giving you a job to do, Todd. It's letting you know that God's going to take care of everything.
That's right.
So that's what I wanted to talk about tonight. Because then
Good.
I was thinking
Good.
about um because I've been thinking about this too, right? Because someone came up to me a couple of Sundays ago and they're like, "I am just so glad you said this to me in the sermon," and I'm like, "My sermon had nothing to do with that." And this happens all the time, right?
All the time.
Or people will get pissed off at you about something you said in your sermon that you didn't ever said in your sermon.
Right. Right.
And so, so I was, I was also thinking about just like we talk about preaching as though it's like one thing, but, oh, it's okay. Um, that there's, as many sermons as there are hearers.
Right.
So
Right.
anyway,
Right.
I'm gonna go see who's at my door.
All right, man.
Okay.
Talk
Bye.
to you later.